From Fox 8 Sports, this is the Overtime Podcast.
From the Fox 8 studios in New Orleans, this is the Fox 8 Overtime Podcast. I am your host, Sean Fazan, riding shotgun as he does each and every podcast as Andre Johnson
Jr.
Do not forget the JR at the end of the name. It's very important to remember the Junior. Before we get into today's content, be sure to like, share, rate, and review. If you are watching us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Get the bell notification for when we drop that fire content. And today would certainly qualify for that, but not in a good way. Ooh. Not Victory Monday, losing Monday in the city of New Orleans. You know you're a little depressed today. You know it. You know it. Frankly, I'm a little down as well because I was in Atlanta. I watched that whole thing unfold, and I still cannot believe the Saints are 2-2 after what I just watched Sunday, up close and personal, and make no mistake about it, they are mad out there on Airline Drive because they were mad after the game on Sunday. But before we get into that, Andre, how's your Monday?
You know, my Monday's pretty good. Obviously, like you mentioned, it's kind of a lull in the city of New Orleans, as it is in any city that really cares about their football team. When they take a tragic loss over the weekend, it's definitely a little cloudy, no matter what the actual forecast feels like outside. But, you know, we move. We got a lot to talk about today, and the Saints are going to be very active, and they've got a big game coming up on Monday this week.
Yeah, don't get any easier, does it? They only have to go to undefeated defending Super Bowl champs who are the masters of what I'm about to get into, but what the Saints are missing right now. So, big picture, I guess that's where we're going to start. Just big takeaways from the Saints' loss to the Atlanta Falcons.
Right.
All right.
The Saints, by the way, if I told you going into that game, a banged-up offensive line, offense dealing with a lot of health issues, they would score 24 points, and their defense would not give up a touchdown to the Atlanta Falcons. You're probably telling me the Saints win by multiple possessions. The Saints lose 26-24 to Atlanta. What's the biggest reason they lost, Sean?
Okay, well, here it goes. Reality has officially hit your New Orleans Saints. The vibes to close out September, whole lot different than the vibes that started September with two fantastic wins, talk of the town, talk of the NFL, to two losses where you had chances to win in both of them. Sunday's loss is the kind that really, really stings. We already know that. It's Atlanta, bitter rival, a lot of emotion. I was there. They are starting to take that rivalry as serious as we've always taken it. Because I always felt like while they did not like the Saints always took it further. It mattered more. Last couple times I've been in Atlanta, though, I got to be honest, they've kind of upped their game, although the attendance isn't quite what it should be for a game like that against your bitter rival. Like when they come back to the Dome, it's going to be every seat packed. They had a lot of passion. They had a lot of emotion. Had a lot of noise. It was very festive. It was a lot of music. It was a party, and they got into it. They were swag surfing. They were doing everything. So it was very intense inside of Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Plus, the actual game was gut-wrenching, heartbreaking, and more importantly, it's the kind of loss that can come back to bite you later in the season. Hello, Green Bay from 2023. It's immediately what I thought of after this game. Here are the facts of the situation. Non-debatable. The Saints completely outplayed the Atlanta Falcons. Let me say that again. The Saints completely outplayed the Atlanta Falcons. I mean, like you said, they scored 24 points, didn't allow a single offensive touchdown. That's normally a 2-touchdown winner in the NFL, not a 2-point loser in the NFL, which is exactly what happened to the Saints on Sunday. Oh, it just pains me just to say it. And I normally don't get, upset anymore because when I watch the football game for the actual football game, the actual football being played. And if an opponent beats the Saints and they deserve to win, that's one thing. But when the Saints outplay an opponent, that kind of gets under my skin a little bit, just a little bit. Maybe it's a little bit of the fan in me. But look, it all boiled down to not just mistakes, but catastrophic mistakes and situational football. That's really what it boiled down to when you talk about the way this game came and went. Rashid Shaheed, what are you doing? What are you doing? You never field a punt at the 2-yard line. And if you do, you never field it over your shoulder casually trying to catch it. And then obviously you lose focus. Maybe you got it caught in the lights, whatever the case may be. Muff punt, lands in the end zone, touchdown before you blink an eye, before you take an offensive snap, and they didn't score an offensive touchdown or a field goal. It's like he lost his head for that split second, and it burned this team. Details, mistakes, you've got to hone in. The pick six. How does it always happen in that stadium with Derek Carr? The pick six. Last year, that was a football play, a pure football play by a great player making a great play and a questionable decision by the quarterback. This was a random throw, kind of thrown in a downward motion, and it somehow gets tipped downward up in the air by Matthew Judon. You almost have to have your hand in the right spot. Flutters up in the air. Troy Anderson catches it, and then he runs it back for a touchdown. At that point, the Saints were moving the football. I think it was 14-10 at that point. They had just gotten a first down. They were really moving the football. And at that point, Kubiak was really dialed in with what he was doing. But, of course, momentum stalled. After that play, it felt like they were chasing the rest of the game because they didn't lead again until the very last minute, which we'll get into right now. Now let's get into situational football. We got to have a real discussion about Saints 2-minute defense. This cannot be ignored any longer. This cannot be ignored any longer. Let's review. Last week, offense did not play well, yet they had their best drive of the game in the time they absolutely had to have it. They gave the defense a 5-point lead with their only touchdown right at the 2-minute warning when Derek Carr hits Chris Olave. I know they missed a 2-point conversion, but still, you gave them a 5-point lead at the 2-minute mark. You need a dominant defense to be dominant in big-time situations. We saw what happened. Blown coverage, boom, boom, boom. And I know the offense got the ball back, and it was a little erratic, but I still kind of felt like the offense did their job in that situation. Defense has to do theirs. Sunday. Do you know on that final drive, Derek Carr went 5 of 6 on that final drive? Several clutch throws. They were down 6. Chris Olave was awesome. They even slow played the quarterback sneak right. I heard some people criticizing the quarterback sneak from Derek Carr. I'm like, did y'all not understand what they were doing there? That was so obvious what they were doing. They were slow playing, trying to get Atlanta to burn those timeouts and burn some clock. And then they got to 3rd and goal. They did it with the first 2. It's a little risky. Don't get me wrong. It's a little risky to do that, but it worked. They milked the clock. They forced them to burn the timeouts. And then on 3rd and 1, Alvin Kamara scores on a Herculean effort where he's met at the 2-yard line by Caden Ellis and wheels his way into the end zone to give the Saints the lead by 1 with just 1 minute left. Defense, let's erase the memory of last week. Let's step up. Let's take over. Let's take this game from our biggest rival on their home turf and upset this crowd here. Kirk Cousins went 1 for 4 for 5 yards on the final drive. Let me say that again. Kirk Cousins went 1 for 4 for 5 yards on the drive. None of his downfield throws were even close. And yet, it didn't matter. Paulson Adebo got popped for an obvious pass interference call, his 3rd flag of the game. Dude, they're not picking on you. It's an obvious call. You've got to figure this out because you're costing your team some situations. And that was all she wrote. A 58-yard field goal at the buzzer, and the Saints lose. After the PI, Falcons didn't gain a yard. So basically, the actual football connection plays, yards gained, they gained 5 yards on that drive. 5 yards from actual football plays that where they either ran the ball or they had some kind of connection. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. You are now in this situation for the 2nd straight week when the quarterback in a 2-minute drill, I guess in this case a 1-minute drill, completes 1 ball for 5 yards. 1 ball for 5 yards, and they somehow kick the game-winning field goal. Should they be more in zone in those situations? Is it a different type of man where it's not so much press, where a quicker guy can be a guy like Paulson Adebo downfield? I don't know. That's for them to figure out. But what I do know is this. This is the norm in the NFL. Not the first 2 weeks of the season. This is the norm in the NFL. These games usually come down to 1 possession, and they usually come down to these types of situations. And if you want to be a playoff team, you have to be your best in these moments. The defense under Dennis Allen is usually really good, but you got to be good when it matters the most.
Yep.
And it hasn't happened the last couple of weeks. And back-to-back weeks, the Saints defense wasn't there. They didn't do what they were supposed to do. And frankly, that's my biggest takeaways from this game. Reality's here. Now you're 2-2. All the good vibes are gone. Back to the drawing board. All hope is not lost because I just went through the schedule today, and they could still really make a run. But Would have been a whole lot better to be 3-1 going into Kansas City, wouldn't it? Wouldn't have been a whole lot better going into Kansas City 3-1 and then putting your biggest rival at 1-3. Instead, you're 2-2. And back to one of those. You know what's bad? Because I've never heard DA curse at the podium. He dropped an F-bomb right out the gate.
Yep.
They were upset after that game because they know they let one slip away.
Yeah, I mean, you said 3-3 was the mark through these first 6 weeks because we both pinpointed the first 6 weeks as being the hardest part of the schedule for the Saints. That was 3. That was number 3 yesterday, and you let it slip away. You go into week 7, the reunion with Sean Payton, 3-3. You feel good. Right now, the Saints are 2-2. They can still reach 3-3, but they're going to have to go through Kansas City, the reigning champions, back-to-back, and you're going to have to go through Tampa Bay, who is on fire. They just gave it to the Eagles yesterday. Whew. So, yeah, you're going to have a lot of opposition to get to that 3-3 record, but we're speaking of records. I know they say woulda, coulda, shoulda. Really looking back at the last month, the Saints would, could, and honestly should be 4-0 right now.
Yep.
And it comes down to what you just finished talking about, and that's lack of discipline and execution in big moments. You look back to last week against Philadelphia. 3 Saints run into each other on the biggest play of the game. Dallas Goedert makes it all the way to the 4-yard line to set up what would eventually be the game-winning touchdown. That wasn't schemed by Philadelphia. That's not how they drew it up. That's not how they practiced it. Hey, we're going to send Dallas Goedert on a drag, and then 3 of the defenders are going to run into each other, and we're going to get some open space. That's not how they drew it up. That's the Saints messing up and not being locked in one of the biggest moments in the game. That's a lack of execution by your best unit, which is your defense. Lack of execution. Rashid Shaheed had no business, forget trying to catch it. He had no business being anywhere near that football that he muffed that wound up being a touchdown for the Atlanta Falcons. That's just a lack of focus in a big moment. You talk about lack of focuses in big moment. The pass interference called by Paulson Adebo, it was obvious. You don't even have to debate that. I know you can't challenge those anymore, but if you could, it might take maybe 30 seconds for them to say, yep, he did it. So when it comes down to it, these are big moments in these big games that you are letting slip away. The Saints, through 4 games, have only allowed 4 touchdowns on defense.
Yeah.
A garbage time touchdown, rushing touchdown by Bryce Young. You had Dak's touchdown to CeeDee Lamb. That was the only one that Cowboys scored. And then Saquon had 2 against the Eagles. Those are the only touchdowns that you have allowed as a defense through 4 weeks, and yet you are sitting here 2-2 because at the end of games you are not executing, you are not locked in. That's one of my points. The second point, and when you just look at the stats at a glance, you say, "Oh, the Saints are, they're 11th in sacks. They're really getting to the quarterback." But when you really look at it, they're not pressuring the quarterback consistently. You look at some of the deep stats. The Saints rank 24th in quarterback pressure rate, pressuring the quarterback at only 30%. 24th out of 32. The Saints allow the 3rd most time for the quarterback to throw, opposing quarterbacks to throw, at about 3 seconds. That's not going to work. You are getting your sack. Alante Taylor has 3.5 sacks. Carl Granderson has 3. Brian Brzee has 3. Chase Young has half a sack. And DeMario Davis has a sack. About half of your sacks have come from blitzes, which the Saints honestly probably don't do enough. But the Saints have got to figure out a way to consistently pressure these quarterbacks because Bryce Young, he's not going anywhere. Dak Prescott, he doesn't exactly want to run. He wants to stand in the pocket and throw. Kirk Cousins for sure wasn't going anywhere last night. So really the only quarterback that you faced that's a mobile threat is Jalen Hurts, and you've got to be able to get to these guys, and the Saints so far consistently have struggled to do that, whether that's Chase Young, who was so dominant in training camp, kind of slowing down a little bit. Carl Granderson was kind of held in check yesterday. Brian Brzee held in check yesterday. There really hasn't been a lot of pressure. So those are the things that the Saints are really going to have to pick up as they head into a game against a guy who's unquestionably the best quarterback in the NFL.
I just did the math in my head. The Saints have allowed 24 points in 2 games.
Yeah.
And they lost both. Situational football, man. Situational football. And it's just, how do you get better at that? I mean, you have to just be in the moment and just make the play. Now, I do wonder if they switch some tactics Do you play a little softer? Do you? I don't know. I do know whatever works. I kind of agree with DA said today. Whatever works. And when it doesn't work, they should have done the opposite. I get that, but you can't look at this and think, oh, this is just a one-off. I mean, you've got to be very aware of this issue, and I don't know if that's a situation with personnel or whatever the case may be. And we should point that out personnel-wise. The Saints played well enough to win despite some significant personnel issues. You didn't have McCoy. You didn't have Cesar Ruiz. I thought the offensive line held up well.
Yeah.
You lost Taysom in the game. We saw how much Taysom makes a difference. You lost Taysom in the game. And my initial thought when I watched the game was, man, that threw him off in the second half. But when I went back and rewatched it, no, they regrouped a little bit quicker than I thought. They were actually better by about the third quarter. They got a field goal, and then there were 3 drives in the fourth quarter. And they got on the plus side of the field every time, scored on, well, I guess only scored once, but they missed on the 4th and goal. And then, like, you had issues with, Demario Davis didn't play. You lost Tyrann Mathieu, Willie Gay. So you're down to, like, your 4th or 5th linebacker in that game. And you still did enough to win, but it goes. I mean, everybody's highlighted. The offensive line of both teams were the biggest areas of concern for both teams. I thought both offensive line played well.
Yeah, the Saints offense as a whole probably overperformed considering the circumstances where you lost your center, you lost your right guard, the 2 veterans on the line. You had to bring up people from the practice squad. You had to mix and match. You had Alvin Kamara banged up. We weren't even sure if he was going to play until Sunday. Chris Olave banged up. He had one of his best games of this season so far. AK got another 26 touches.
Yeah, we're going to have another topic on that because that's going to be something that we're going to really dive deep into. So you did enough to win, and it's just that's why this is so, like, gut-wrenching, because it's your biggest rival. You had a chance to win, and you kind of let the game slip away. You let Atlanta sneak out of there with a win they didn't really deserve. And it'd be nice. That's sometimes that happens, but it'd be nice if the reverse were true sometimes. Yep. Like, it had happened the last couple of years. Like, every game the Saints won last year, they deserved to win. It wasn't like they rallied late and won. Like, every game they won, they deserved to win. Every game they lost last year, they pretty much deserved to lose with the exception of Green Bay. You just hope this is not the pattern for this year. Outplaying teams in this pesky situations, you're just not playing your best. I think that's got to be the lesson you learn for these last 2 weeks. It's just how close you are to 4-0. Now you're 2-2, going to visit a 4-0 team who kills it when it comes to situational football. Because if you look at the Chiefs' stats right now, they're not great.
Yeah.
But they do well when the game matters the most. And the Saints have not been able to do that the last couple weeks.
Patrick Mahomes, 13-12 when he is down by 10 points or more.
That's an incredible stat. That's an incredible stat.
By comparison, Tom Brady, I believe, was like 37-61, and a lot of people will tell you that's the best quarterback of all time. Patrick Mahomes with a winning record in games where he's been down by double digits. That's how dangerous that team is and how they are never out of the game. Even now where they're struggling at points, they just lost Rashee Rice. He's expected to be out for the rest of the season, and that's their number 1 wide receiver. But all that being said, you can never count out those guys.
No. So good luck. Good luck, Saints. So it'd be nice if they go on Monday Night Football and give them their first loss, but we'll see what happens. I know we got y'all have a ton of questions. We got a ton in from the Final Word feature on the Final Play. Yeah, by the way, leave some comments below. I know y'all are probably upset. So leave. We'll try to interact as best we can. But let's get to some questions.
The first one coming from Paul Sperando in Marrero. He says, Marrero, has anyone asked Kubiak or DA when they will start letting Taysom Hill throw passes from the shotgun, keeping the defense honest where Hill is not running into a wall on every play? That could be part of the reason why he's banged up every week. For context, Taysom Hill has not attempted a pass so far this season. Last year, he attempted 11. He was 6 for 11 last year for 83 yards, 1 touchdown to Jawan Johnson against the Bears. In 2022, he was 13 for 19 for 240 yards, 2 passing touchdowns. At this point last season, he had only attempted 2 passes. He completed them both for 21 yards. Sean, should Taysom be throwing more?
It's coming. I can promise you it's coming. It's going to come around the goal line. It's going to come. I haven't necessarily had a problem with him not throwing yet. I can understand where you're going with that, though, because now that he's banged up, God, I hope it's not for a long period of time, because we see, Like, they can adjust to life without him. They adjusted better this week without him, but you saw in that second to last drive when they got inside the 5. I mean, how great would it have been to have Taysom on in one of those 4 plays, and then especially on that third down run where they went power with Alvin Kamara. If you had Taysom on that drive, you got an extra blocker, and you already scored on that play earlier in the game. So not having Taysom there certainly hurt, but I think that's coming. I think let the mad scientist Kubiak kind of work it into a system. And let me just say this. After a tough week for Kubiak in week 3, I thought he bounced back well. And like I said, it felt like it was a bigger impact on him when Taysom left initially. But then when I went back and watched it, it was only a couple of drives where I felt like he was a little out of rhythm. So I thought overall he called a pretty good game.
Yeah, and I mean, Taysom has excelled in what the Saints have asked him to do so far. I mean, as a blocker in short yardage situations, Taysom has been dominant in those situations. He scored twice yesterday.
Yeah.
So I do believe the pass is coming. You know, there really hasn't been a situation so far this season where he's needed to necessarily throw a pass. You know, what he's been doing has been working, but I agree he does have that ability. He is a quarterback at heart. You know, when it comes down to it, I think Taysom, you know, sneaking a pass in would be good for the Saints, and I think that they'll work their way to it, but we're still early in this season, and it hasn't come to the point where he has had to yet, but it would be a mistake to just completely take that element of his game out.
I think Tebow jump pass is coming pretty soon with Taysom. It's called the Taysom jump pass. I think that's coming at some point. What's next?
Up next, we got one from Josh Gus in Gentilly. Will our running back Kendre Miller be back on the field soon?
Okay, I'm going to keep this answer brief because I want to do a whole pod on this topic, but Alvin's not going to last with 55 carries over 2 games. 55 touches, over 2 games. That's not going to last, especially when he's coming off of a rib injury. So they need someone to emerge. Now, Taysom would have been that guy. Again, another sort of cumulative effect. So not having Taysom hurt because I think he had 6 carries yesterday, 24 yards, if I'm not mistaken, and he only played 2 quarters, so that's a lot. Yes, they drafted this guy to be a dynamic number 2 back. Jamal Williams just doesn't. It's just not there right now. It's just not there when you give him the rock. AK's obviously still got it. I mean, who do you turn to? Mims? Clearly, they don't like what they see with him because he hasn't been really doing anything. So, yeah, it's well past time for Kendre Miller to be healthy and ready to contribute. And when it's time for him to get on the field, do the right things to stay on the field because they need a second back desperately because it's not going to last if they don't.
Yeah, Alvin Kamara with 97 touches through the first 4 games. He had 20 against Carolina, 22 against Dallas. That'll work.
I like that.
I'll take 20. I'll take 22. 29 against Philly. It's a bit much. 26 yesterday against Atlanta. It's a bit much, especially considering that's just the carries and the receptions that he's getting. He's still getting targeted, and he's getting hit on those. He's still blocking. We did a film study for Black and Gold Review where Carr was blitzed. Yeah. AK was in there picking up blocks. So AK has taken a lot of punishment in the last month, and it showed on the injury report in week 3 where AK was battling a hip injury and rib injuries. So you would definitely, a guy going on 30 years old, you don't want him touching the ball that much. And there is a window for Kendre Miller to be the guy they drafted him to be. They were very high on him coming out of college, and there's a window where he can realistically come in and take about 10 touches a game.
Yeah, I mean,
he had that game last year against Atlanta. He played against Atlanta last season, week 18, 13 carries, 73 rushing yards, 1 catch for 6 yards, and he scored a touchdown. So he hasn't played very much, but Kendre Miller has shown the flashes when he's healthy and on the field. Problem is getting him healthy and on the field.
I mean, look, these guys are injury prone. He's not even 4 games into his second season. I mean, that's just not a good sign. What's next?
Up next. Is Chase Young playing as well as he did when Dennis Allen said he was almost unblockable earlier this year? That coming from Chuck Tho in Ponchatoula.
Look, I know people are upset with the lack of numbers in the stat sheet. I still see a guy that's got burst. I still see a guy that's disruptive. He had a big tackle for loss yesterday. What were his final stats yesterday? I don't even know. But he's a guy he's getting on the field a lot more. I know he had the most amount of snaps from defensive end position. I would love to see him finish more and get those sack numbers and get those pressures and, get the sacks and disruptive and all that stuff. He hasn't quite match what we saw in training camp. But in training camp, you can't tackle anybody. So touching the quarterback on the shoulder is a sack. Where in the NFL, in the game, it don't work like that.
Yeah.
So part of the deal is you got to finish. So they're going to need him. And, boy, it would be great if he showed up in a big way on Monday Night Football against Patrick Mahomes. By the way, he sacked Patrick Mahomes, if I'm not mistaken, in the Super Bowl last year. So it'd be great to get him up and going. I'm still high on Chase Young, though.
Yeah, I mean, maybe he hasn't been the dominant force that maybe they thought he would be coming out of Ohio State. He hasn't been the generational pass rusher that they said he would be so far, in his tenure with the Saints, but he hasn't been bad. In every game, there's been at least one play where you say, okay, Chase Young, I see you. It was the tackle for loss yesterday.
Yep.
He had one against Philly. He had a sack, or I believe he got credited for half a sack. In Dallas, your dominant guy has been Carl Granderson so far. He's been the best pass rusher on the team by far. He even had a big pass breakup yesterday. So Carl Granderson's kind of been that guy so far. But you would like to see Chase continue to grow in this defense. We mentioned the lack of consistent pressure for the Saints. Chase Young continuing to get better and feel more comfortable. That would definitely play a big role.
All right, we got about 50 seconds left. Can we squeeze one more in? Do we have
can.
any more?
We
Let's
got
go
one
real quick.
From Brandon from Laplace. Why is it that under Dennis Allen and the Saints, they continue to have the inability to close late in the game?
Oh, boy, we just did the whole pod on that. That's the big bugaboo when it comes to Dennis Allen. I think the team is good enough. I think they can compete with anyone, but that's the difference. That's how close the line is. You got to finish games. Real quick, what's your response?
Lack of discipline and execution. That's what cost them in the last 2 games. You get those right. You're 4-0 right now, going into Kansas City against the defending champions. Hopefully, moving forward, they can shore up those 2 problems.
Look, this sticks to DA, and that could be a reason why his tenure here is short. But way too early to call that right now. We are running out of time here. We only got a few seconds left. So for Andre Johnson Jr., I am Sean Fazan. This has been fun. Hopefully a victory next week. We'll talk to you guys next time on Overtime.